Our guest this week is Bridgit Dengel Gaspard. I'm so happy to have you here to talk about your new book, The Final Eighth, and just welcome to Free Your Inner Guru, Bridget.
Thank you. I'm very excited to be here, Laura.
So we were just talking offline, and I was sharing with you that I've read The Final Eighth and have gone through not all of the exercises in the book, but certainly all of the chapters and the core concepts. So I'm really excited to dive deeper, if possible, into them with you today. Before we go that route, I would love to hear a little bit about your journey and how you came into this world that if somebody was to ask me what genre the book is, I would place it definitely in self-help, but there's also a fair amount of psychology in the book too. So how did you get to where you are now?
So I am a former performer and I live in New York City. And so I was performing in New York City and doing stand-up comedy and writing skits and things like that many, many years ago. And I was also having my own issues in terms of needing healing. And so I actually read the book by John Bradshaw, which is a classic, Healing the Shame That Binds You. And I recommend it to any listener, even after it's 30, 40 years old. It's incredible. In that book, at the end, he listed a word I don't love, alternative healing modalities. And there was about 7 pages about this technique called voice dialogue. And as I read it, I was electrified. And I'm like, this just felt like the it thing. And so I hunted down the doctors, Hal and Sidra Stone, who developed it, which meant I got their 800 number. And so because I was an improviser and I'm a dancer as well, I love body and physicality. That's how I work. And so I was attracted to it quite as a creativity tool. I thought, on the one hand, this will be fabulous for the audition situation. Like you have to come in being sane and being hello, everyone. Then you have to go as the character to the height of despair or the bottom of elation, whichever way you're going. Then you have to come out of that energy, be available and say goodbye. And so it just felt like such a great tool to use for creativity and for navigating these different environments. So I followed up. I started to get facilitations of voice dialogue, which really is talking to different parts of yourself. And so what I loved about it is you could go to a part and you'd ask that part, tell me all about you. So if you go to a perfectionist, you're like, hey, perfectionist, how perfect do you like things? You never say, can you relax a little? Bridget's having a few issues here and your perfectionist
Just
standards are
relax,
kind of through the
Laura.
roof. I
Doesn't
know.
work.
Thank you. How often does that work? AKA, I
Yeah.
think never. And so it was so validating anyway as an approach. And so as I started to really engage in the voice dialogue process, I started to be trained as a trainer. And I became mesmerized. The healing that was unfolding just in these trainings between fellow participants was mesmerizing. And so quickly, it's like people got a visceral sense that they were much larger than who they thought they were. And that alone is healing. And so over time, the performing and the pursuit of parts just lost appeal to me, because what was really riveting was all this work. So I went back to school and I got my master's in social work, which is how I could become a psychotherapist in New York at Columbia University. And so then that married the psychology, the clinical expertise and experience and training with voice dialogue and all of my creativity and writing, which I've always loved. So this book really is an amalgam of all of that and a distilled version of my own journey. And here are things you can do to have that promise of a life you could not dream of, that because it's so amazing. And having access to different parts is liberating.
And it's interesting because with this, when I first started reading the book and the first couple of chapters, you're meeting like your inner selves there's a really you have a really fun sort of play on words in a number of your chapter titles and subtitles and but beneath that fun layer, and now that I'm connecting with you on purpose, I'm understanding that fun layer, even more so. You're meeting these different aspects of yourselves, and they're being treated as almost like alter egos. And
They are, I
and
would use that synonyms. I would say they are alter egos. Just sorry to
and
interrupt.
oh no, please. And so there's, part of me was like, yeah, this makes sense, because there's, I do talk to myself in different voices. Some of them are very, very positive and high energy, and some of them are quite on the sort of darker side of the spectrum, the more sort of punishing, perfection, shamey stuff.
Yes.
And you delineate though between the difference of that and, say, like multiple personality disorder.
Yes, this is about a healthy personality. And I'm glad you brought it up because people think immediately, oh my gosh, that's a mental illness, the dissociative identity disorder. And more research shows a healthy personality, which voice dialogue is absolutely about. A healthy personality consists of many selves. So for example, they're doing brain imaging and they're showing that when you think of yourself from different parts of yourself, different parts of your brain light up. So our sense of self is actually not one place in our brain. So that, say, our maybe wounded inner child is much closer to the amygdala, which is the reptilian brain, or the center of emotion. Whereas maybe one of your CEO, get through the world, alpha type selves are often more toward the frontal cortex, which is our decision making. So this is about health. And I'm glad you brought that up, because I think one of the absolute terrors of most humans on this planet is, am I crazy? Everyone wants to make sure they're not, because it's terrifying if to think that, and to have to, wherever that we end up talking about that. So no, I always think about the meaning behind that question is, I just want to make sure, because I don't want to be crazy. Like, no one wants that type of thing.
Yeah, and so we're somewhere between, an allegory or a metaphor, or these actual parts of ourselves.
Yeah, exactly.
So let's go through a little bit of the method together, and I think any exploration of that probably leads us to talking about core beliefs,
Yes,
because these aspects of ourselves um, seem to be either have one-to-one relationships with a core belief,
yes.
or many to one with something that is, a primary core belief, if there's a hierarchy.
Yes, exactly. And we will do it. And the idea being, though, the book, I chose to focus on people who were so close to their goal and then stalled in front of their finish line, because I think that's often a pattern with myself and so many people, and it's really frustrating and demoralizing. But that is where it crystallizes. So the book really helps you, say, figure out what's going on, and in that case, which selves are for your goal, which selves are against the goal. And the selves that are against the goal, they have wisdom. And so the idea is, the voice dialogue method helps you find out what that is. And they have concerns, because regardless of the self, it has the noble purpose of protection. And so keep that in mind as we go through that. And also that it's a mystery. It came out whole, the term the final eighth, from like the ethers. When I watch clients that I knew were amazing and really were talking the talk, and then boom, suddenly they're stuck and it didn't make sense. It makes sense if you're stuck because suddenly a law was changed and now you have to do something different. You're not really stuck, you're annoyed and you have to shift directions. But especially the final eighth is about when it's a mystery. It doesn't make sense, which means it's an inside job. And so
Yeah.
that's where you go inside and say, okay, what is this double bind, these parts that are in like a tug of war between I want the goal and I don't want the goal. And I would love to show you a little bit of the technique. Do you want to do it with me? Should I lead you through? And
Sure.
you can say
You get
no.
all excited, I get all nervous.
I saw your flush.
Yeah. Yeah, anyone who wants to go on YouTube and watch my eyes open up wide. Um, sure, yes, I'll play. And just before we go into, because I'll put a different hat on for that.
Yeah.
Um, one of the things that I think is probably universal about this is, like, think back, like, as soon as I saw the title, when your publisher sent me the proposal to have you come on as a guest, I was like, oh, I know what that final eighth is. It's the week before finishing an essay doing my undergrad. It's throwing up roadblocks when something is almost done, and not taking it either to market or to fruition.
Yes.
So it felt so familiar. And it had there's resistance, but one of the things that I love, in case I forget later, is that you make a big effort to say, like, these things are not to be ignored. And that's where I think this is a departure from a lot of what's out there sort of as mainstream self-help, which is you power through
Yeah.
these negative voices that are holding you back, and there's no wisdom to be found in them.
Right.
And it's like you we there's a danger of minimizing those concerns by not paying attention to what they might be trying to say,
It's
including maybe this isn't really what you want, right? Maybe it's what someone else wants for you.
right.
But to have a method to go through that
It,
is incredibly
yeah.
powerful.
Yeah, exactly. And I always like to say, if doubling down and powering through works, do it. But it's again when it has stopped working. And I think many people underestimate the power. You can say, oh, well, that core negative belief isn't true. And I would say, oh, I know that. But that doesn't mean it's not completely controlling my life. There's a disconnect. Like, okay, fine, I agree with you. You don't have to convince me, but I still, it's my MO right now. And so I thank you for that. I think this method really is a way to say, okay, you're here anyway. You're running my calendar. That's the other thing. You may as well talk to those parts because they've got your life right now. So how about that for just a reason?
Yeah,
Like,
end
if,
of, right. So
so
I'm so I'm going
yeah,
to share with you and anyone listening that my hesitation is that I you're talking to someone, I hate role playing. So if this feels like role playing to me, it might get weird. So you're the
oh, I'm glad
professional
you said
here. You get
that.
me out of that. So
Oh, I'm so glad. Yes, this is not role playing at all, at all. So thank you for that. That's and if it feels like role playing, we'll just do a couple. We'll do just only 1 minute or something so that people can see it. So in the
sure.
process, you talk about yourself in the third person when you're in a self, because the idea is when these selves come over, they say, "Oh, this is all the picture. You're seeing everything," and that's another danger. You think you're seeing everything, and you're not. You're just seeing the part that from the eyes of those parts of you that are primary. So then when you get to move over and see it from another part, you're literally opening up your terrain within and have a much better view. And so I don't want a role player unless it's someone who like if I might be working with a client, I'm like, and if you have a role player self, let's talk to that role player self. And that role player can show me all the good roles she plays. But this is genuine. It's what comes up spontaneously, and also in a way that helps you not filter in the usual manner, because we would say in voice dialogue, that's a primary self who is your filter, and so is always there ready to make you say or not say something. So we'll just go quickly to a self, and then you move over slightly, and then you talk about Laura in the third person, and I am the self, and we'll talk about how you feel
Okay.
doing it.
All right, I'll try.
So
Now, this is weird. I have to take my glasses off for this.
please
No
do.
filter. There, they're off.
Ah, and you can breathe. So you can pick any self you'd like.
Sure. And I'm laughing on the inside, going, "Oh, here I go doing my inner work in public again." Um,
Wow.
there's enough of me out there. so, um, so I'll choose something that's very clear and present. So I'm writing a book. I'm writing a memoir, and for most of the year, I have been writing pretty much, if not daily, almost daily. And then September 4th, my mom, who's 80, fell and broke her arm.
I'm sorry.
Yeah, thanks. She gets
Oh,
out of lawn care support tomorrow. So it's, there's a silver lining here. But the reason I'm sharing that is there's definitely an aspect of me that kicked in at that point, and the writing went by the wayside, which logically makes some sense. We had a lot to take care of. But my, I don't know what we're going to call it or her, but I'm the eldest. I'm the only daughter, and it's not the save everybody or take care of everybody. It was the, this is more important, to the absolute exclusion of what else is also important. That's just mine. So I don't know what we're going to call that self. Maybe you know.
And we don't have to call it anything. I think
Okay.
you've described it beautifully. So it's the part of you that mom is in need, and that's it. There's no other priority. I mean, that's the thing that needs to be taken care of, that part of you.
Yeah. And for anyone who's not here, there's nothing wrong with that. I'm not judging it.
Oh,
I'm
no,
not
nothing at
resentful,
all.
but I'm like, oh man, this has been happening, if not with my mom, with somebody else my entire life.
See, thank
Right.
you.
So
That's
yeah.
what we find out is all of these selves are operating now, but they have this history.
Yeah.
So we're only going to go for, many, many, many seconds. So it's,
Okay.
don't worry.
Don't
But
have
I
an
love
anxiety
that.
attack.
So we could, yes, I've got you. I'm going to keep you safe.
Okay.
Voice dialogue is very safe, and we care about safety. So if you don't have a name that jumps out, then we can go without a name, because it's really about the energetics and the physiology. And those that are watching this podcast as opposed to listening, I mean, I can see your physiology. It just, there was when you talked about that self, there was a heightening of your posture, for lack of a better word. And it's like purposeful. There's a presence and a you're not actually going forward, but this feeling like I'm going to go forward wherever that's needed, or something like that. Energetically, that's what I'm picking up.
Yeah. That's like you're wading in,
Yes.
and taking charge.
Yes. So go to either one side or the other. So you're not in your
Okay.
center, and we'll
All right.
just be with.
And the point of that, I'm going to stay a little bit in interview. So the
Yeah.
point of shifting over, and you
So
call it the aware chair in your book. So
yes. So you're leaving the aware chair now. Thank you for that. And going
okay.
into a self. And
Oh,
the
I'll go
point
closer
of,
to the mic. I'm coming closer to the mic, not farther.
oh, gotcha. Okay.
Okay.
Your inner podcast engineer
Yeah.
came
It
in.
just kicked in.
Yes. So you do that because you always go back there because it's for you to process. But the reason you leave is so that you, Laura, get a sense of this energy without other distillations and things. You get a sense now of this part of you, energetically, physiologically, and also whatever words we're going to use. That's why. So you get a better sense of this part of yourself for your own self-knowledge.
Okay.
So I have a bunch of questions in the book people can use. So, but one is I'd love you to share anything you feel like sharing now about Laura, obviously being quite aware we're on podcast.
Yeah. Well, and of course now I'm drawing a blank. So about this aspect of me.
Yes. And you speak from the I. So you would say, and I know you care very much about Laura's mother. That's how you came up in this conversation. Maybe you want to
Okay.
say something about that.
All right. So yes. So yes, I absolutely care very much about my mother and my brothers and extended family. And this time round was a little different because I voiced some of my concerns about not really wanting to take every single thing on or over. Um, and I'm proud of everything that we've accomplished together, but I'm also um, very aware that I have to manage that I don't get angry, because
Gotcha.
I know what I have let go in the meantime, and nobody asked me to let it go,
Right.
but
But
somehow I
you're
can't.
the one that made her let it go, right? You're the
Yes.
part of Laura that made her let it go. Other parts are mad about that, but you have a priority, right?
Ah, yes, I suppose I do. Yeah.
I see you now. Now, we're not going to stay long because this is a demonstration, but the one important question is, do you need anything from Laura as herself that is separate from her totality?
Some rest. Um,
Yeah.
right? Like we're done now, and some rest. That's what I need.
Well, thank you. And again, if we were doing a full session, we would spend 20 minutes at least together, and I'd find
Mm.
out a lot more about you and what early role you played. Because I know Laura mentioned this isn't the first time that you've stepped in and done some amazing things. It sounds like her family really benefits from your love and care.
Yes, and there have been instances where th- one could say I've overstepped.
Got you. That's what you've
And
been accused of.
no, no one's
Oh,
ever been brave enough to tell me that,
oh,
but I know that
gotcha.
because I have hindsight.
Oh, got it. Well, thank you for playing with me, and I just really happy that you're here, and it'll be interesting to talk to Laura now, but also after she sees this session and maybe what she learns looking at you from this point of view. So take your time going back to center and don't
Okay.
rush into talking with me so you can feel the physiology and energy shifts between now Laura in the aware chair and now I'm going to talk to you as you. And then that part over there is separate.
Hmm.
And I'd love to hear anything you want to share.
So sure. I'm sure you noticed that, and I was surprised that taking on that voice is actually a lot more playful than I realized. Like there's something about it that part of me absolutely loves taking charge and running forward.
Exactly. And is good at it. I would
Yeah,
assume.
and
I'm making an assumption, but it seems like
sure. Yeah, yeah, sure. Yeah, I can get, yes, I can, I think that's a big part of the leader in me. And the piece that would be very interesting to explore is the part that gives up the thing that the leader is creating for herself
yes, exactly.
versus for other people.
That's brilliant right there. And also, the other thing about doing this work is even if you don't go to herself, you can note what other selves were around. So she mentioned an angry self. So that's in there somewhere, a part
Yeah.
that's angry about letting go of your own personal agenda. And so we're not going to do it now, but great exercises that are in the book is like, what is the rule for success according to that self, say, versus the other one? And it sounds like internally we have permission to do certain things. Like you have permission more to be in that self, and somehow the permission for you to go forward on your own CEO manifestations, you don't have as much permission. So
Mm,
it flips away easier. And the book talks about that, that we have to, that sometimes that final eighth is because you don't have internal permission to go from contender to victor.
right. Right. Yeah,
So
absolutely.
thank you for playing with me. No, so we would go
Oh,
to a different self if we were having a full session, and certainly some were mentioned, like you said, the one that's gives up your personal agenda for almost the larger agenda of caring for your mom or maybe other family members too.
yeah, or even and you could extend it out to whether it's like the community, the group, the people that I'm working with when I was a teacher, the students, like it's, so it's definitely a big part. And I want to actually, before I lose this, you know what, even doing that for a couple of minutes like we just did, it really helped, because as I said about the whole role playing thing, when I was reading about the methodology, my I guess high and mighty self was looking at it going, oh, this is kind of cute, right? And thinking, and I explained to you, we talked about this a bit before we
Yes.
came on, the deeper I got into the book, the more I was like, oh, this is not just cute, there's all kinds of ways to look through this construct at yourself and your self-awareness. So that was really fun. And thank you for being brave enough to do it on here with me.
Well, thank you for being brave enough to say yes. And that, what did you call her? The high and mighty self? I think
Yes.
that's wonderful. And the high and mighty self, if you went to that self, you'd ask kind of like, how long have you been in my life? What's your greatest successes? So even like my high and mighty self, because I've got one too, might be, oh my God, I insulted so and so with my I'm superior stuff. Like, you let the selves just share their greatest successes, which might not actually be something you're willing to share publicly, meaning maybe you're a little nervous about it, or it's taboo, or you have shame. And the
Or
private work
maybe
should
you're a bit
stay
of an
private.
asshole.
Oh yeah,
Right?
there you
Yeah.
go. I sorry to say, and
Or
that there's
I should have said I.
right. Oh, I have an asshole, and I may as well just admit it, because rather than be ashamed or embarrassed about it. And as a result, I'm probably an asshole less because I have a direct relationship with that self. And now I can say, hey, what's going on? I feel my shackles rising, and I feel like just being a cutting asshole. And then often I could say, oh, because underneath some vulnerability within me has been struck. I don't need to act out if I can focus in.
Absolutely.
And if I need to act out because I need to protect myself and my inner asshole helps me, then I want to have access when it is exactly the right time to cut someone down and get out, or whatever it is. So
Yeah.
again, it's so personal. But if you don't have two things, if you don't have access to your own inner asshole, you often don't recognize assholes. And then you let yourself be taken advantage of. Because if you have a self that says it's all good and everyone's good and that's great for that self, but if that's all you have access for, then you're actually more in danger if you can't recognize an asshole because you don't have one, so you think. So that's the other part in terms of where it gets deeper. People like to disown their victim, their predator, and it's not that the fear is that that's going to be what they become fully, and it's not true. But a little homeopathic dose of awareness of your own victim or predator, which I talk about in the book, then you can recognize one and you can go away. Some of it is not about actually to have a transaction. Some of it's like, oh, my antenna is telling me this is dangerous. I'm gonna
I'm going to
go.
step back. Yep. You know, when I was listening to you and when we're playing with inner asshole, but I can see how in the, what was coming up for me was, yeah, that sounds a lot like the amount of awareness that you need, say, to be able to recognize, say, a narcissist, right? Like if you don't have awareness of your own narcissistic tendencies, then you are very vulnerable because it's not behavior that you recognize in others, so you're less likely to be able to see through the the veil that they put
Right.
up.
You'll get seduced by the wonderful aspects of many narcissists, like
The
your
charisma,
own, the what? Say again, sorry.
the charisma or
I was just,
the
yes, the charisma. And also then we have selves, and I think some of this might be evolutionary. I don't know, because we are social beings who need to attach in order to thrive, just period. But there's parts that are like, oh, that person knows everything. I can relax. And then like sort of our inner children let big parent take over, and it feels delicious. And you, again, if you can be aware of the deliciousness or the toxicity, you just have more choice. And sometimes I think it's very boring what the overall goal is, which is have more choice. It's not more complicated than that. It can be quite complex, but having more choice and have that be actually true is liberating. And I have a chapter in here called Practice Safe Success, because
yes.
having more choice is also a stressor.
Mm.
And potentially
How does that relate? Like
to the
what's the
final
stressful
eighth.
piece? Yes. Yes.
So I think a lot of times the final eighth, you have this, that you're stuck inside of the finish line. Suddenly there are parts that are like, well, if I'm too attached to my nice person selves, then I'm going to have to make decisions if I say form my own company, or leave the corporate world and start my own. I'm going to be the asshole. I'm going to be the one that says, great idea, don't have the budget, or whatever it is. And if I'm not able to withstand the distress of making other people unhappy because I have a picture of the larger goal, that's where it fits in. Is that you've got to have the tolerance. I think have tolerance for all of these choices, and then that the buck stops with you. And before you could say, well, I'm licensed to do X, so I can't do more than that. And maybe you're frustrated on the one hand, but there may be parts who are really comfortable. Yep, that's not my bailiwick. I'm just here. So you'll have to go elsewhere. And there's nothing wrong with that. But again, choice is the key. And that's how it relates. I don't know. Did I answer your question?
Yeah, you did. And you also brought up one of the ways that I sometimes have articulated some of this is in terms of bandwidth, right? Like that choice
I love
would
that.
give you that more bandwidth to be able to withstand the, say, as a leader, um, out of the example that you chose, like the unpopular aspects of your decisions, because we can't make everybody happy.
No, no.
And so and I can even equate that in my own journey to you know to participate, say, in some of the projects that I do around my own story. It's like, well, if you're going to put yourself forward in that, some of the crippling fear in the past has been around, what will other people think, or judgment. And with practice and repetition, and sometimes learning the hard way, it's about realizing, like, yes, there's a part of me that wants to have that public persona, and there's the other part that is, it's just anathema, right?
Yeah,
It makes me, it's that fight, flight, or freeze, and you
yeah,
have to manage that consciously.
exactly. Exactly. And that's what I feel the final eighth process gives you some great ways to do that. And that then your decision making is more conscious. Am I doing it because I want so and so to like me? Now that's we have societal, like that's not the right reason. But maybe if in terms of networking, maybe it is the right reason. And not because you're taking away from yourself, but it's like, you know what? This person actually is part of my growth goal. So I'm going to behave a certain way, or I'm going to put off X, Y, or Z. But if you're being dictated by the mottos of other parts, like always be nice, or no conflict is bad.
I put myself on timeout. I'm just going to close the window. It's getting windy. I
Oh,
apologize. This will get cut out, but I know my mic is picking up that creaking, so I had myself
oh, no,
on
no
on
problem.
mute. Okay, so I've lost my train of thought.
Um,
Um,
about,
oh, I was going to interject. Just go quiet.
yeah, good.
Um, like, good girls don't do that, or smart people don't do that, or all of these voices that we, and thoughts that we may be self-generating, but maybe we were gifted them earlier in life as well.
Yes. And that's one of the exercises, is to ask the self, what rules of success do you live by? So your good girl would say, well, just be really, really good. And if that doesn't work, be even better. And if that doesn't work, be even better, better, gooder, girder. Right?
Boring.
Boring. Exactly. And not very effective. Now, that so when you find out, like you said, whether they've been gifted to you or somehow you pick them up, you realize, whoa, I can't operate by those rules and move forward. And that's again, the double bind brings to me, flushes out these old rules and ways of leading that are not effective anymore. And I call it a detox. It like detoxes your system, and you can take out stuff that either doesn't work anymore, or in fact was always a bit of poison, and that it was never the right approach. And but these parts of you carry those beliefs still. They don't know better yet.
Yeah, keyword. Let's jump into the double bind, because that definitely, that jumped off the page. I can't remember if that was the first. It had been such a long time since anyone put that idea in front of me. I think it came out when I did my undergrad in psychology. So
Oh,
there,
okay.
so it was around me, but the way you've explored it in the book is really very powerful. So let's start off with, what is a double bind? Where does the idea come from? And then how does it work within the final eighth and the inner voice dialogue?
Yeah, because I think this is one of the key aspects. So the double bind, you're right, comes out of the 1950s. A guy named Bateson put it together in studies with schizophrenia. Again, we're talking about healthy personality here, but that's where it originally came out.
Okay, so
And
definitely it was my undergrad. So yes,
yes,
that's
yeah,
okay, perfect. Thank you.
of course. And so the double bind is a literal irreversible dilemma. I'm sorry, unresolvable dilemma. And so the classic one is Sophie's Choice, the movie or the book, where the soldier says, which child do you want basically me to go and kill? Which child are you going to give me that will probably end up being killed? That's a double bind. You can't win. And the other thing about the double bind, it's so psychologically scarring. Like in that the book and the movie were her never getting over that moment when she gave away one child versus the other child.
Mm,
And so that's a very dramatic one. But a lot of times people are in a double bind, kind of like if the good girl in you runs your life and you need to be assertive, that's a double bind. You cannot be a good girl all the time and move into your next level of success, whatever that is. It cannot happen. And so a lot of times these rules that we have, like being the good girl is like, I'm using that one. That was one of my primary selves, certainly. So mm, it's got the weight sometimes of the morality of a cardinal sin. If from my,
absolutely.
yeah,
You're speaking
and
the
that's
Catholic
paralyzing.
language here. Yep.
Yep. Yeah,
Oh,
sister.
I was just wondering.
Yep. With a name like Bridget
Yeah.
and Laura.
Yes.
um,
Absolutely.
and so that's the other reason I think this is such a good technique, and why it doesn't work for so many people to just say, well, bulldoze those core negative beliefs. Because a few things, those core negative beliefs or fundamental beliefs, and they're usually negative, meaning you're bad in some way, they're so painful. But if a couple of things happen, if so you believe, so there's parts of you that believe, say, I'm unlovable. And the thing about core negative beliefs is they are always false, 100% false. However, what's true is you were told that. That's painful. And what's also true is you believed it and made decisions as if it were true. So often there's grief here because you didn't think you were worthwhile. You didn't stand up for yourself and you didn't pursue your own goals, which is one of my woundings. And that's what helped me write this book. So you start to understand that some of the double bind, again, is also invisible. That's part of its power. You can't see it. And so you're up against the double bind, which is that stalled, stuck state, which is the 7/8 versus the final eighth. And you've got parts of you that have what we call cognitive dissonance. If the other parts of you say, but it's all love and everything's energy, and I believe that it is, it's not untrue. However, it's not the whole picture. So it's all love goes up against I'm unlovable. It doesn't work. It's corrosive. And it's like, also it can generate anxiety and depression because we're so smart. It's like, wait a minute, if I'm unlovable and all is love, then I'm a fool for even trying. I'm stupid and I don't want to be stupid. I'm stupid because I'm not going to fall for that crap that it's all love, because I know I'm unlovable. And I'm talking with words that are conscious. Most of this is deeply unconscious. I'm just using words to reflect what's happening deeply inside.
And you can see just the way that you've put that, the lengths that we'll go to make ourselves right in that
Yes.
regard.
Yes. And that's about tragedy. I think that's partly, again, some of the motivation for my writing the book. I consider those unlived lives tragedies.
Yeah. Yeah, I agree. I think it was within the double bind, you describe the parentified child.
Yes. So that's another, again, term that comes out of psychology. So the parentified child, and can I just make a station break for all, there's also wonderful aspects. So you're 7/8, because you're in this double bind, you actually work amazingly hard and you meet amazing people and you get amazing experiences. So what we're talking about is not to put down the good stuff. And that also is true with the parentified child. A parentified child often has extraordinary strengths because of what they brilliantly went through, although it's very painful. So the simple version of a parentified child is they take care of their parents' emotional needs so that they put their own needs aside to take care of the parent. I'm noticing a
Oh,
little echo. Sorry.
oops.
Um, oops. And again, it's never a bad thing to,
Surprise says no one. So,
there we go. Although
we're
I
all
see
good.
the blushing part come
Yeah,
out
we're all
again.
good.
So, and all to say, there's nothing wrong with putting a schedule aside to help with a family. In fact, there might be something very wrong if someone didn't do it. So that this is not us talking about landing on one side or the other and one is better than the other. But so the parentified child is in a few things. They're set up for what is the Sisyphean task. Now that's the Greek myth where the guy, for whatever reasons we won't get into, keeps pushing up the boulder. And just as the boulder gets to the top of the mountain, it rolls down, taking Sisyphus with him. And he's doomed for this. Now that's totally the final eighth. How many times have you gone all the way up to the top of the mountain? A lot of people don't go up the mountain. So that this is not for them.
Yeah,
These
so
are for the people who
congratulations on getting 7/8 of the way there,
right.
right? Yeah.
But what happens is you solidify your core negative beliefs as I'm not worthy, I'm incapable. And the Sisyphean task, it's a trick. It's not, you're not a failure because you can't get that boulder up the mountain. It's an impossible task, as is parenting your unparented parents. You can't do it.
Mm,
You were not you and little ones and older ones, myself included, would do anything to heal the parent, and to have them love us in the way we want love. But but the other thing that happens, it's internalized that it's impossible. So now all they can see is how they haven't been able to help the parent be a better parent. Even though often they often they become charismatic and problem solvers and cheerful ones and all of that wonderful stuff that we don't want to throw away. But ultimately, they look outward. How is everybody doing? And I'm not safe until I know everyone's well. So again, a
mm,
lot of it is not altruism. It's like, uh-oh, I'm seeing something about a
right.
particular situation.
It sounds more like self-preservation than
It,
altruism.
Correct. And I think it is. And again, nothing wrong with altruism, but and also it gives you a role that you can focus on, say at 4 and 5, because especially if it's a chaotic house, but I know where to look. How's mom doing? How's dad doing? Who's crying? Da, 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 whatever. How's my little brother doing? And then it's like, oh, I'll take care of little brother, maybe whatever it is. And so that's the good news is that, again, you've got great empathy muscles, all kinds of things. You have clairvoyance often that's just, it's like, uh-oh, something just happened in Kansas and I can feel it. And
It's
neither of us are
coming.
living in Kansas.
No one else
And
can
we're
see it.
accurate.
It's coming, right? Yeah, absolutely.
But notice but what about within? Every time I might abandon my other selves that are much more aligned to my higher purpose. And so that's part of the goal is to pull that beautiful, loving parts of you that have a distorted loyalty, but it's out of love. I love you, parents. I, I want you to have whatever it is you want. And that's a parentified child with its gifts and its stings. And once you can get to know them and these parts, you just love them. And it is an inner parenting, like you parent those parts and you say thank you, but you allow them to keep that story. You never tell them that that didn't happen when it happened. It doesn't, it's not the story of today, but that's a big one that since I've written a book, I've gotten more fierce about that. You just
Mm,
hold that self and you're like, yeah, that really happened, because you're validating it, because so much of the parentified child, it's invisible stuff. It's like, why are you
yep.
so upset? And it's like, me.
And you know what? I'm gonna reinforce what you just said there because you give it a fair amount of real estate in the book.
Yeah.
And so just by virtue of that, it was going to be on my list, let alone the fact that it's rather obvious it applies to me. But when you think of the beginning of the year, when people went into lockdown, there were a lot of memes going on about the latchkey kids And, and I'm 53. So I was a child of the 70s. And what happened in the 70s, moms went back to work. And kids were taking care of themselves at home and maybe putting on dinner, or this idea of coming home for lunch and being fed bologna sandwiches by mom at lunch, it went away.
Yeah.
And so even just without anything specific happening in the home, you can see how generationally
Right.
there's this um, cohort of people who experience that kind of a, you know, reversal of, or upending of the previous norm,
Yes,
and had
that's
to
true.
fend for themselves. And to me, that's why I think it's worth exploring, because I don't think it's really been looked at all that much across the board. So you had
Yeah.
all of these people born in the late 60s and 70s celebrating themselves because they knew exactly what to do when it was time to go into lockdown,
Right. Right.
right?
Yes.
Because you're
And
and so there's something here about that, even if it was only to take care of yourself.
And given how what you're talking about, and that can also be considered resilience. Again, like you said, it's not
Absolutely.
all bad. And so I agree. I was actually talking to Sidra Stone, who developed with her husband Hal the voice dialogue method the other day, and she felt that people who were more in touch with their varying selves handled the COVID lockdown and other behavioral requirements much easier because they already had a more fluid sense of, okay, well, my office self doesn't have a place to go. And there was a lot of grief. Like, even if people complained, they loved their office, they loved their gym, their watering holes, their weekend park get-togethers. And there was, and those selves were desperate for those things, and they couldn't in the name of health. And so that's a great way to put it. But then if you're aware, if you've got some latchkey skills, and you're like, all right, I have a bellycon bouncer now, so that I still get my exercise in a very efficient way
Mhm.
that's fun. My little kid loves it because I couldn't go to the gym. And so I immediately went to, well, I'm not going to not exercise. So what's another option? Whereas I think
Right.
some people are like, I don't know what to do because my gym self went to the gym and took care of
Yeah.
that aspect of my life.
There's something huge here about the value of the awareness journey in general,
Yes.
or the self-awareness as a skill to, or a muscle to develop, because it's that conversation that you had mirrors some of the conversations that I've had, either with guests. I don't think anyone else recorded, though. I think before or after,
Oh,
or
got
some
it.
of my friends who have been, who are, work in the field or have been along the journey with me. And you could probably extend it to, like, if you think about the trauma and the loss, so people who have had to process that energy already, or suddenly the world, what you thought was true isn't true anymore, all of that.
And
um
also, now that
it's
you're
it's a
saying that,
skill set. It's a
yeah,
skill set that we can develop by one method or another. Clearly this method is
really
to do
helpful.
that. Yeah.
No, you're also reminding me, because I don't want to minimize it, like, also the rites and rituals that humans love, like having someone die of COVID who
Oh,
and couldn't even hold their hand. There's also there's deep grieving to be had, and those parts of us that over centuries rituals help us deal with certain things. So I also want to acknowledge that. And a lot of times, and I talk about this in the book, we actually cultivate selves because we have to, not because we want to. We get a diagnosis separate from COVID. This was, unrelated to COVID, or cool things happen. You have a kid, and then you have a second kid, and then you got two kids with sibling rivalry, and you get the job of your dreams. Like, if we're able to, it's because good things have happened. I often say, really, the final eighth is a success issue. It's our light that is scary, much more than our dark.
mm, I love that.
I mean,
It
obviously, it
reminds
comes off of Marianne Williamson in terms of the dark
Yeah.
light, but I couldn't agree with it more.
Well, and to think about it, it's the final eighth. it is, success or completion is within grasp. And for whatever reason, you're not grabbing the brass ring.
Right. Right. And then this book helps you figure that out. And also the wisdom of not grabbing it. So you're not like, hey, can you move along? I want to grab this brass ring. You'd go to the self that says, oh no. And then that self will tell you. And I notice on my body, and also all of these selves are
You have a posture.
a posture, exactly. And so that's one way to find out what selves are operating. One of my exercises that I love, and for your listeners, is just bullet point throughout the day. When the alarm clock rings at 5:30 in the morning and wakes you from a deep sleep, you've got 5 selves in response right in away. Turn that thing off, or, oh, I'm excited, we're going to get up, or the responsible one. Okay, 10 more minutes, but then yes, I'll get up. And so it's just, that's our natural way. And then just start to bullet point, not have any opinion. Or you can have your opinions, but you don't have to write anything about it. Just who's showing up and when, including the ones that want to say something that don't. That would be a self. They don't have to actually express, but they're there. And then you get to start to understand, wow, I've got a lot of selves. And that goes back to awareness. And that's wonderful.
Yeah, and and I've got a lot of selves, and I'm not crazy, right? Like there's
You are not crazy. I would actually say you're mentally healthy. The opposite. I mean, I think having access, it's like your mental health and resilience is so much wider bandwidth, which I love that term. It's like you expand your bandwidth.
so let's I feel like we could be on here for hours. But before we start to bring this to a natural close, let's talk about some of the strategies that people can use to get themselves to the finish line and across it, assuming that this is a finish line that wants to be crossed.
Good assumption.
Yeah.
So, so literally dialoguing with that self. And I have a series of questions and finding out what's going on. And I once had a client who we went to her resist herself, and because she was self-sabotaging, as they say, and she was in the entertainment field and as a performer, and she was actually moving up. And so suddenly then she was blowing these auditions, and these are auditions she had fought hard to get. So we went to this self. I expected this kind of big thwarting energy, kind of almost like a 4-year-old saying no. And a lot of times we still are attached to our core negative beliefs because they came in so early. And so that's why logic doesn't work. It's not held in our logic parts. So that's a quick aside. So anyway, I didn't get that part. It's what the part that came surprised us both. I got a much more sophisticated, almost leaning in to tell me a secret that my client had a potential drinking problem if she were to move up. Exactly. We were both stunned. I had worked with her for a year and had never come up. And so we went back to center, and my client just started crying because that part was correct. The idea of being out and socializing, going to parties was mandatory in her field. She had to go. And so from that point of view of that self, she was saving her life. From that self, what? Bridget becomes an alcoholic, or Bridget becomes a performer. I'm just using my client's name.
Right.
There's no contest. From that self's point of view, alcoholic is out. Then the whole shift of our work shifted to talk about how she could say no when she meant no, because she often said yes when she meant no, and how to handle the drinking. She didn't have a big problem, but she had to be aware that her stress level was going to make her more dependent. And that was an antenna for that self who had problems of dependence in the family line. So you end up respecting, like, I actually want to know the secret of the part that doesn't want it. It's not your enemy. They're often not your soft and fuzzy, friendly inner selves, but they're the ones that are like, look, if you want this, then this has to happen. And often the cells, once you take care of those concerns, they back off. And so the idea is the double bind, the final eighth knot. Often it's not like you have to use as much force. It's like, oh, it like literally kind of unknots because the concern is being dealt with. Once my client started to just become more aware and then handle things differently, including making sure she got enough sleep, because that was one of her big vulnerabilities. Because that self did not care about her
That
career, actually. That self could care
right.
less. And
That self wanted to protect and probably knew without it being in her awareness that she wasn't resilient enough or didn't have the ability to have boundaries around it.
especially when she had a few drinks in her. So exactly. So that was the mystery was unlocked, and that self had protection as its only strength. And so the more she did, the more this one had to just like say no to the, and that was the knot for the final eighth knot.
That is so, it actually mirrors a conversation I had recently with somebody
Wow.
about and it was over alcohol, and it's uncanny the similarities. Yeah, so there's just so much to be gained, and I mean I hope that anyone listening hears not just the enthusiasm of two people talking about all of this stuff, right? We've never met before, and and here
No.
we are, right? Which is so fun, but also like the deep excitement that comes from how empowering it is,
Yeah.
to be able to uncover these things about you. And there's different ways, there's so many different ways to get there. And if I'll just use myself as a bit of context, when this wasn't a method that I was aware of until reading your book. And so I went down a very different path to becoming aware of some of these core negative beliefs in my own, parentified child, if I didn't have that label at the time. But the value in doing it is so powerful. And then of course, because it's me, there's always something, and because we've also seen a bit of my protective side, which is part of why I have this podcast, is there's also there's vulnerability in going down this path as well.
Yes.
And that's partly why this podcast exists, and why I have a voice in this sphere, is to investigate and explore resources and tools that allow for both the light and the serious, or the positive and the negative aspects, and knowing that like every trait, every tool, every self has a very light and powerful side, and also has less endearing aspects, and it's all perfectly okay. It's not normal, it's not abnormal, it's not unhealthy.
Exactly. Exactly. And then it's so energizing, just everything you said. And so that you have access to so much more energy because it's not wrapped up in blocking.
Absolutely. Well, Bridget, my goodness, what a pleasure to meet you
Oh,
and to
oh,
play with you, and to be able to share this book and your work with the listeners. I will leave links in the show notes to your website and to the book. Do you have any beyond the book on your website? Do you have any resources that you can guide people towards that might
absolutely.
broaden their journey?
Yes, I'm glad you asked. So yeah, I'm completely reachable online and all of that stuff. But every third Thursday of the month at 8 p.m. Eastern, my colleague Eric and I offer a free Zoom shop where we show two basic short voice dialogue sessions. And that way, as people are reading the book, they're envisioning however they are, and that's great. But they can come see once a month and just watch an unfolding, just like with you. It's not pre-rehearsed, it's a real session. And they should just contact me for the Zoom information, and I'll give them that month's Zoom information. We encourage people to come a lot, but sometimes it really helps people to see it. They're like, oh, and when you come, bring your journal, because it's so edifying just even coming in and watching voice dialogue, because you're like, oh, I didn't know about that self, because of course it's a mirror. So that one is so much fun, and that's ongoing. Third Thursdays, 8 p.m. Eastern.
Wonderful. Well, thanks so much for sharing so enthusiastically and being willing to take me on. And I love the idea of that Zoom, because like it did for me here, it kind of closed a gap in understanding
Oh, that's, yeah, thank you.
between, between reading it and just getting into that voice. It felt like a subtle shift, but energetically it wasn't subtle at all.
Exactly. Oh, good. Right. And that's what we had hoped, to close that gap. So, and you're welcome to join us anytime yourself.
Wonderful. Thanks so much for your time and
Oh,
your energy.
thanks for having me.